Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Julie Lytle. I'm the Director of Distributed and Lifelong Learning Initiatives at Bexley Seabury Seminary. And I'm happy, along with Connie Campbell-Pearson and Roxanne Klingensmith, to be joining you to have a conversation with Deacon Bette Kauffman about her work doing advocacy for immigrant detainees. This program's called Deacons Talking on the Road to Emmaus. And it's designed as a way for deacons to walk together, to share stories and the hope of animating and supporting and renewing diaconal ministry. It's co-sponsored by the Association for Episcopal Deacons, the Episcopal Province of New England, and Bexley Seabury's Lifelong Learning Program. All of the videos are free, live interactive web conferences, and they're usually on the second Thursday of the month at 8:30 Eastern Time. Next month, on January 11th, we're going to be welcoming Deacon Denise Lavetti, who'll be talking about church planting. So we hope you'll put that in your calendars and come back and join us. But for tonight, let us focus on having Deacon Bette share her story about her work in Louisiana and introduce us to what's going on in Louisiana with immigrants and detainees. Deacon Bette?
Let's have Connie do a prayer. Connie's going to open us with brief prayer.
I'll open us with
That's
prayer.
right. I'm sorry.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Lord God, help us to remember those who tonight will go to sleep unfed and unwelcome, strangers in foreign lands, people who have fled for their lives and are far from their homes. We lift up to you those who are escaping persecution and conflict, having fled death, torture, or ruthless exploitation. And we purpose now tonight to open our hearts and our ears to hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. And in all things we say thanks be to God. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you both, Julie, Connie, and Roxy, and all who are involved in making this happen. And for those of you who came, I'm honored and a little bit flabbergasted, but and I was a little bit flabbergasted. I'm going to start by confessing that I was a little bit flabbergasted when I got Julie's instruction. I agreed to do this months ago. You know how that goes. You agree to do something and then it gets closer to the date and then you get your instructions and you go like, oh my, what did I sign up for? And then Julie told me I could tell stories, and I felt much better immediately because stories I can tell. I couldn't preach if I couldn't tell stories, okay? So I'm gonna do this. I have a little PowerPoint. I'm gonna share my screen here for a few minutes to sort of start us off and give an overview. And then I'm gonna unshare my screen because I would rather be looking at your faces, some of your faces. I can't see everyone now, but I would rather be looking at faces when I'm telling stories. So here we go. I'm gonna share my screen. For my presentation tonight, Tales from, and then I decided, I realized I need to put Louisiana in parentheses here because Tales from the Field depends on what field you're talking about and where you are. And Louisiana, as I think you will learn to know tonight, is a kind of a unique field when it comes to this particular subject. And the subtitle is Walking with Immigrant Detainees. But I really could have called it On the Road with Immigrant Detainees because my work has been primarily with transporting immigrant detainees after they're released. And those are the stories I'm going to tell you. Before I launch into those stories, just an overview. The stories, I'm going to tell you two stories. One of them is an excerpt from a sermon that I preached, and I do have my sermons online, and we'll give you that link if you want to go read the whole thing. I'm then going to come back to this PowerPoint after those stories, and I'm going to talk about why Louisiana. Why is this happening the way it's happening in Louisiana? And then I'm going to introduce what my diocese, how my diocese is now responding to this situation. So that's an overview of where we're going to go tonight. Bear in mind, as I am talking and telling these stories, things change over time. I started this ministry last winter, and COVID has certainly changed things. But I also think that some things have changed in the political situation. I think the detention centers have gotten more receptive to our ministry to the detainees, and I'll say some things about that when we get there. Um, but also bear in mind that there are differences among places. And I mean that not only in Louisiana, but even within Louisiana, that different detention centers have behaved differently. And I have experience with one. I live in the community of Monroe, Louisiana, which has a detention center in a bedroom community on our southern side of town. And that's the only one that I have worked with. And it's probably, there's been lack of consistency, I would say, from detention center to detention center. So now for some stories, and I'm going to bail out of this PowerPoint. Whoops. And come back to stop my screen share. There, that's what I want to stop share. Okay, that's better. Thank you. I've just momentarily get discombobulated by the technology too sometimes. So I'm going to start with Valentino. I'm going to call him Valentino, and I'm going to call my friend who got me involved in this ministry, Elizabeth. Elizabeth is a justice person. She is not a church person. It's one of the interesting and I think relevant points for us tonight is that the church did not get there first. Other people did and saw the need, and then the church kind of got drug in. And I think that happens. It's a perfect example of what our bishop and what Bishop Michael talks about from time to time. God is at work in the world. And sometimes the church is not the first one to notice it, okay? But thankfully we did. My friend Elizabeth is very avowedly not a church person. She was organizing her many friends and acquaintances via a Facebook page. And the name of that page is Louisiana Advocates for Immigrant Detainees. And if you want to write that down, and I can put it on the screen later, but you can go to that group on Facebook and ask to join if you are interested and want to see what's happening more in this part of the world. She contacted me because, first of all, she knows the kind of things I do and get involved in, but she also saw the need to have clergy people involved in this movement. Many of the people, the detainees who come, do have a faith tradition that is very important to them. And most of the detention centers have chaplains, but still, she saw the need for clergy people to be involved. And so she called me and alerted me. I had already found out that there was at least one detention center in Louisiana. I did not know the extent of it back then. I had found out from a priest friend who found out about it, and I talked to the bishop about it, and I was poking around, but she invited me into this Facebook group, and that really is literally how I got involved. So shortly after that happened, after I got involved and joined the Facebook group, Elizabeth put out a call that 4 detainees were to be released from Richwood Detention Center, again, just a few miles from my home on the south side of Monroe, Louisiana. The information was minimal. Today, okay? The call went out from Elizabeth early in the morning, and the information was today, 4 guys would be released. We had no idea when, but the thinking they might need a place to spend the night. They're going to need transportation to, we were not sure where, just that 4 guys are coming out today. And that's one of the characteristics of this ministry in the early days anyway, that getting any kind of coherent or accurate or complete information was impossible. Family of one, and Elizabeth did know this much, that the family of one of the detainees had hired a, quote, taxi in Alexandria, Louisiana, which is 2 hours from Monroe, to come and pick up these 4 detainees when they were released from Richwood. Now, that in itself is a tragedy. There were people, again, it really seemed in the very beginning that the detention centers were not interested in our help. It almost seemed like they kind of resented that ordinary citizens were getting involved in trying to help the detainees. And so they could have called, if they had called, and checked around a bit, one of us could have gone and gotten the guys, but instead the families they weren't giving our information to the families. Nothing like that was happening. And so this family had hired a guy to drive 2 hours from Alexandria, Louisiana, to pick up these guys at the detention center and drive them into Monroe 2 or 3 or 4 miles, and charge them an enormous amount of money to do that. So families have lost lots and lots of money over this system because they have no information, and we had found it hard to help them in the beginning. So in any case, they did not get released until late in the afternoon. And this man who came from Alexandria drove them to a hotel in Monroe where I had made reservations for them to spend the night, because by then it was too late to take them anywhere. The detention centers were not giving names of volunteers to the detainees, etc. Just a real communication gap. I and another volunteer had gathered up some meanwhile, while we were waiting for them to be released, gathered up warm clothing and paid for a couple of rooms for them to stay in at the Red Roof Inn. And so finally, late that night, I don't remember what time, but I think it was past 9 o'clock when I finally got the call, they're out, go meet them at the Red Roof Inn. And so the taxi driver had taken them there. They had been released, and this was again a pattern. They had been released wearing t-shirts and jeans. And I know you're gonna laugh, but it does get cold in Louisiana. Okay, not like it does where most of you are, but that particular day, it was raining and it was chill and it was windy and it was cold. It was just that kind of thing that soaks into your bones. And these guys were released from detention wearing t-shirts and blue jeans. So that was our practice. We all of us for months carried around warm clothing in the trunks of our cars, because we never knew when we were going to go to the detention center to meet somebody who was being released who had nothing warm to put on. We paid for rooms for them at the Red Roof Inn. It turned out the taxi driver was fluent in Spanish, which was helpful. I'm not very fluent in conversational Spanish, but he helped me to talk to the guys. 3 of them, their families had actually paid for a room in a different hotel. We didn't, again, that information never got to us in advance. So the taxi driver took those 3 guys and took them to the hotel where their families had paid. I notified Elizabeth, and she was coming to town the next day and was going to take care of them. Valentino was left at the Red Roof Inn, and he had spent the night there. I got up early the next morning. I had gathered together. First of all, his family had bought him a bus ticket, and it was not a cheap bus ticket. He had to go all the way to the East Coast because that's where his family was. His family had bought him a bus ticket. I paid over $100 for a replacement bus ticket, so I'm sure that that's what it cost them. But by the time Valentino was released, the bus had long departed from Monroe, Louisiana. So again, no communication, no coordination, just pretty chaotic to try to do something about this. So anyway, I picked up Valentino the next morning, took him to the bus station, gave him some cash, some snacks. I had found a little cloth briefcase type thing that I gave him to carry his papers in. And it was, well, I fed him also the detention centers, they feed them breakfast, but if they're being released, that's the last food they get. And so he was hungry. And there was, fortunately, within walking distance of his hotel, a Mexican restaurant, and I took him there and he ate a big meal. And so the next morning we get to the bus station and he pulls out of his pocket a cell phone. It is, of course, long since dead, and he has no charger. Whatever they brought with them to this country, when they are released from detention, they no longer have it. I was amazed that he had the cell phone, but he did. He had the cell phone, but the charger was long gone. He had no other clothing, nothing. His papers was what he had. So it was too late for me to do anything about the cell phone then. So I really felt terrible, but I had to put this kid young man who knew no English, had, a few bucks in his pocket and a few snacks, and I put him on a bus for a multi-leg journey across this country to catch up with his family on the East Coast. And that was really hard to do. I realized how spoiled we are with travel these days. We don't go anywhere without our cell phone and the ability to access people at either end of our journey. And here I was putting this kid on this bus to go this very long distance by himself, not knowing the language, but he made it. By the time That all had happened. Elizabeth had managed to get his sister's phone number, and that's where he was going on the East Coast. And I called his sister the next day, and he got there fine and dandy. And so it was a big, big relief from me. So that's the story of Valentino that really kind of illustrates some of the issues and problems we've had doing this work with these people being released from detention. Now I'm going to plunge into a sermon. I preached a sermon, and this part of this second story I'm going to tell you comes out of a sermon. The sermon was called Encountering the Holy, and I'm not going to give you the backstory of the sermon. I don't think you need that, but again, I'm going to tell you where you can go read the whole thing if you want to. I preached it almost a year ago between Epiphany and Lent. And so, you know, I'm just jumping right into the middle of it. I'm going to just read it to you now because I wrote it. I think it is most effective to tell this story in this way. Here goes. I do not have answers to all of the questions immigration and asylum seeking raise, but I have gotten involved with a group of citizens seeking to make sure that immigrants detained in prisons and jails throughout Louisiana receive humane treatment. The humanitarian supports this group provides include primarily social visits to detainees, putting a few dollars into their commissary accounts so they can buy creature comforts that our for-profit prison system does not provide, sending cards and letters to alleviate their isolation and loneliness, and taking them reading material in their native language. But the main way I have gotten involved in is helping those who are released. When a detainee is granted asylum or is bonded out by their families, the responsibility of ICE and the detention center ends at the front door. But actually, the challenge in helping begins earlier. It seems to be virtually impossible for the support network to get clear, definitive information about when someone is to be released. So last Thursday, another volunteer and I took turns going to Richwood Detention Center to pick up a Cuban who was being released. The network had gotten word early in the morning that he was definitely to be released, probably mid-morning. Then the word was noon, then early afternoon, and so forth. I had to teach a class at Gray's school, so the other volunteer was on call. By the time I emerged from class at 3:10 p.m., the Cuban had just been released and was sitting with the other volunteer in her car in a parking lot near the prison. His family had been in the US for some time. They lived in Florida, but a bus ticket to take him there would have cost $250. This network carries on with no official funding. But we had a plan. One of the key people in the network, a friend of mine, lives in Natchez, Mississippi, and she had been in touch with his family. If we could get him to Natchez, his brother and cousin would drive all night from Florida to meet him there. The other volunteer could not take him to Natchez, but I could. It's important to know that when an asylum seeker is released from detention, whatever they brought to this country with them, they no longer have it. This man was wearing every item of clothing he owned, namely a torn pair of jeans that did not reach his ankles, loafers with no socks, and two thin shirts, one of which was actually long-sleeved. Do you remember the weather Thursday afternoon? Cold, wind, rain. I offered him a heavy corduroy shirt left behind by my late husband, but he declined. I offered him a meal at Taco Bell, and he said he wasn't hungry, but he certainly was thin and looked hungry. When they get out of detention, where they have typically been for 8 or 9 months, a year or more, they have one thing on their minds: contact with their family. So we got into my car. I stopped to fill up with gas, and as we headed east on Winsboro Road toward Highway 15, south toward Natchez, I plugged in my phone and handed it to him. None of his family, of course, was among my contacts, so he used the instant messaging app to request connection. A few minutes later, his mother responded, cautiously, because she, of course, did not recognize my phone number. Hola, ¿quién es? She typed. Who is it? My passenger grabbed the phone, hit the FaceTime button, and all heaven broke loose in my car. I have never before witnessed a family reunion anything quite like it. Te amo, te amo, te amo. My conversational Spanish is not good. I can read the language very well. I can speak it pretty well. But when native speakers are conversing, I understand a little. But te amo is easy. Te amo means I love you. And that is what the first few minutes of that conversation consisted of. Te amo, I love you. About 5 minutes in, my passenger tapped my arm and turned the phone toward me. His mother wanted to see me. Thank you, thank you, thank you, she said in heavily accented English. Thank you for helping my son. The reunion continued unabated for a full hour as we drove south. The father came into the call and other family members. There was much laughter. At one point, my passenger sang a song to his mother. I gathered from what I understood that he was singing for her the song he had composed to sustain himself emotionally through long months of detention. She began to cry. Then she asked to speak to me again. Did I mind if her younger son, my passenger's brother, played and sang over my phone? Of course not. And so we were serenaded by a clearly talented younger brother, and on it went. It is past time for me to sit down and be quiet, so let me try to put into words what I hope you will take away from this. Jesus was there Thursday. It did not feel like a mountaintop experience at the time. I was tired. I hadn't had dinner. I wanted to go home. But Jesus was there. Jesus was in my car driving through the rain and in that family reunion. Jesus was in my friend in Natchez, orchestrating the whole thing, although she would be the last person to say that. She then drove to Sicily Island to meet us, so I didn't have to drive all the way to Natchez. Jesus was in two volunteers bouncing between our ongoing lives and making sure the stranger among us didn't walk out of that detention center and find no one there to greet him and help him. Jesus was in the whole thing. Amen. I'm going to pause now and just, if anybody feels like they'd like to respond or ask a question before I go back to my PowerPoint, and talk about facts and numbers and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So because I am moved by this story. I am moved by the memory, and I kind of need a pause before I go on.
I have a question for you, Betty, and that is, what can those of us who do not have a detention center close by in the general vicinity where we live, what can we do to assist in this ministry? Because here in Montana, we don't have that, but I think about this ministry a lot and know that there is some desperate needs. So could you respond to that, please?
Yes, I will try. And it's hard. It's kind of hard to, because I don't know quite the mechanism for how to make these things happen. But two things immediately come to mind. One is there is a need for funds. And if you go to the Facebook page, the group that I mentioned, Louisiana Advocates for Immigrants in Detention, or for immigrant detainees, Louisiana L-Aid, Louisiana Aid, L-Aid is the, but if you find that group, you will find that occasionally, because, my bishop, by the way, my bishop reimbursed me for Valentino's bus ticket, but everything else came out of my pocket, and the volunteers are spending a lot of money out of their pockets. Among the things that for-profit prisons don't provide, believe it or not, is toilet paper. The inmates have to buy their own toilet paper.
Commissary.
Yeah. So they always need money in their commissary accounts. And so funding, and so they put appeals for funds every so often on the Facebook page. Or you could find out, I have encouraged our bishop, and I believe that we have now a diocesan fund that will go to we're going to, so that would be something that you can find a diocese that has a ministry like this and perhaps contribute some funds if that's what you would like to do to help with these for people who are closer who can do the work. So that's one way. The other is that you don't have to be close to be a pen pal. And people who are stuck in detention, that connection with the outside world, you can't imagine what it means to them. It just means so much to them. Now, to become a pen pal, you have to, again, be connected with a group that is close to get you a name. However, I'm going to talk a little bit about this at the end, but the chaplain at Richwood has now said that if people send cards, he will distribute them to the detainees. So this is this is not, previously you had to have the name of a specific detainee or sending something would do absolutely no good. So that's another possibility. How exactly that's going to work, I can't tell you yet, but we are looking for ways to enlist chaplains in distributing mail or greeting cards or whatever, but look into finding yourself a pen pal. It will be so much appreciated.
Betty, I see that Roderick McDowell had his hand up.
Hi,
Roderick.
I'm from speaking to you from Fort Erie, Ontario, Canada, in the Diocese of Niagara. If you run into people who wish to claim asylum or come to Canada, it's really important you get in touch with Viva La Casa in Buffalo, New York. It's a project that was started by communities of Roman Catholic nuns, and it's now part of Jericho Road. It's important they do not do certain things, such as claim asylum in the United States. And if they have relatives in Canada, or if they are unaccompanied minors, or they can come, they're from Mexico, for instance, they can come to Canada and make a refugee claim. We don't have private detention centers in Canada. They're either detained by Canadian Border Service Agency in hotel facilities, and now with COVID, they have to quarantine for a period if they have no suitable place to go. And the only ones that are detained are those with criminality, or they can't determine where they came from, or they might flee. I used to do refugee work for many years, and Viva La Casa is invaluable in helping people. Even if they've made a claim or they need some help, get them, contact Viva, and they will probably know in one of your states an organization that can help them. We in Canada are just so hopeful that the president-elect and the new Congress will make some changes to your abominable laws. And I would urge all of you to do whatever you can to lobby for it. It's ironic that George W. Bush actually had a decent immigration reform law and couldn't get it through his Republicans. So God be with you. And just one reminder, Betty, I'm sure you all know this, the Holy Family were refugees. We're going to remember that very soon in our liturgical calendar. And actually did a refugee claim for Jesus to the governor of Egypt. If you ever would like to see some of it, I might be able to dig it out and reproduce it, but that was years ago. So Jesus has been through the kind of things you're describing, except they weren't detained. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that we in this country are, most of us on this call, very, very hopeful that things will indeed change with the new administration coming in. And that it has been difficult, that the challenges under the current administration have been enormous. And I actually have a feeling that that's already part of the somewhat different response we're now beginning to get from the detention centers, a response of greater cooperation, because I think that change is coming. So thank you. And this is it is important to know what Roderick is talking about. People who, we are not just getting people from Mexico and Central America and South America in the United States. Our detainees is a very, very diverse population. We have Cameroonians, we have Asians, we have Muslims from Muslim African countries. We have all kinds of people. They come, and many of them travel to Latin America in order to come up from the South and get into the United States. So there are probably also those who try to come to Canada, but actually, you know, moving them on to Canada was, I think that Canada has been far more welcoming. But indeed, we get all kinds of people coming into the United States from the South because that is the easiest route to come. And they get to Central America or South America, and then they walk up to the United States.
So Betty, your Louisiana is not on the border of anything.
You're right.
Except Texas. How did you get involved in immigration and refugees?
Let me now go back to my PowerPoint. I'm going to share my screen again. If I can find it. I accidentally, hold on, I think I accidentally closed the PowerPoint when I didn't mean to. Okay, here it is.
While Betty's getting that up, remember you can post questions and comments in the chat and we'll make sure to repeat them if you don't want to say them yourselves. So feel free to keep the conversation going in the chat box.
Eddie, this is Ken Bacino. While you're bringing your PowerPoint up, I just wanted to let you know that your stories resonate so well with me. I'm the board treasurer of a organization up here in New Jersey that does exactly what you do. We're called First Friends.
Thank you. And I will also should mention that COVID has put a serious cramp in my ability to do very much. I'm 75 years old. We had a guard died at Richwood from COVID. And it has been a hot spot. So I have been providing other kinds of assistance, gathering up food, clothing, cash, etc. But I haven't actually transported any people myself for the last while, simply because I have to be really careful or I'm going to end up sick. So yeah, thank you for that. I know that we're not the only ones, but here's Louisiana, okay? We have 10 active detention centers in Louisiana. As you can see from this map, we once had 11, and the detention center at Plain Dealing was shut down, or at least ICE backed out of it, because the conditions there were even too terrible for ICE, which should tell you something. Follow the money. This is a story about following the money. Louisiana, and I'm going to hit some high spots here. I can't begin to give you a history lesson about Louisiana politics and finances, but I'm going to make an arbitrary beginning of my story with Katrina. Post-Katrina, cash flowed into Louisiana. FEMA cash, grants, donations of all kinds. Cash, you would not, no, of course, Katrina cost us a lot of money, but cash flowed in to Katrina, and the state was suddenly more flush than it had been for a very long time. The next thing that happened is that a bunch of myopic legislators saw that and said, yay, I can get reelected on an I cut your taxes platform. And they began cutting taxes. We pay practically no income tax in Louisiana, very, very, very low property taxes in Louisiana. They cut taxes to, because we were in the black for the first time in who knew how long. Very myopic, because that was going to go away, but you know, politicians. Okay, so then we elected, and forget, you know, I'm a little bit cynical about this, so you're going to have to give me a little leeway here, but then the state elected a Norquist Pledge governor. You all remember the Norquist Pledge. This man had taken the Norquist Pledge, which was no new taxes. Well, our state legislator had just cut all the taxes. And so now our state budget goes from a surplus, being in the black, to plunging into massive deficits. And he refused to consider and had a lot of support in the legislature for not looking at revenue, refused to look at revenue as part of the problem. What he did for his 2 terms as governor was try to cut our way to economic growth. Brothers and sisters, it does not work. You cannot cut your way to economic growth. You have to invest to have economic growth. But that's what happened. Higher ed, education in general, and small towns across Louisiana took a royal beating. There was no money for anything. And most of these small towns are small and they're fairly poor by and large. A number of them are majority African American. And they depended on the state budget for help with their policing and all of their public services, and that help went away. And along comes ICE with big bucks, deep pockets, and thousands of immigrants that they wanted to detain. So if you were the mayor of Richwood, Louisiana, what would you do? You'd sign a deal. And so the map that you see in front of you, there were 2 existing ICE facilities, but the little green dots are all local jails that got converted into immigrant detention facilities because ICE was willing to pay lucrative amounts of money for this to happen. So that's why Louisiana. That's the situation in Louisiana. And it's important for me to explain that because the people of Richwood are not bad, nasty people. They're just broke people. And I don't know how many, and Richwood in particular is a largely African-American community and a poor community. And it makes complete sense to me. I think it was totally rational for them to make a deal with ICE. And I'm assuming that, I don't know all of these communities intimately, but that's not the only place that happened. So that's the story about why Louisiana. Now, the diocesan response, I'm happy to tell you, this kind of, I talked to the bishop about it. And then another interesting thing happened. We actually have an immigrant attorney now helping us at the diocesan level. He was from around here and he heard about what was going on and he found that all these ICE detention centers had sprung up in Louisiana, and he decided to come to Louisiana to help. And he made contact, he's Episcopalian, and he made immediate contact with our diocesan office. And the bishop had heard about this from me, and so the bishop appointed his wife, Joy Owensby, to lead a group of people to see how we could form a diocesan response. And this is our logo and our mission. And I wanted to share that we have a discussion about, should we include this Matthew passage here? And we decided, I in particular said, yes, we absolutely must include. I was in prison and you visited Matthew 25:36. That needs to be in as part of our logo in all of our correspondence, because this diocese is a pretty conservative place. It's a very, it's mixed, but it is overall, I would say, a fairly conservative place. And immigration is a trigger. And so this group has made it pretty clear that what we are going to do is try to minister to people. I will continue to do what I do as I can, and that includes advocacy and et cetera. But this particular group has set its mission to be a ministry of the diocese in trying to reach out to detainees to alleviate their loneliness and their isolation, take them. One of the things that we've done at one of the detention centers is we got the chaplain to agree to distribute Forward Day by Day. So we have been providing copies of Forward Day by Day in Spanish and English to that detention center. I'm pretty sure we're doing it in Spanish and English to that one detention center. We're kind of just getting this group has been forming for the past couple of months. It has not got a whole long track record yet, but again, right now we're working on this problem that Robert shared with you earlier, that we learned that in one of the detention centers, there are some Muslim detainees who do not have prayer rugs. They've been using towels, bath towels, as prayer rugs, and we are trying to get 10, I think it is, prayer rugs into the detention center so that they have something more appropriate to say their prayers on. I'm hopeful. Again, there's a priest colleague in this community, and he now has talked to the chaplain. When I first got involved way back then, I was told, don't go to the detention center in a collar, because if you do, you are immediately identified as representing an organization, and that organization has to apply to ICE for approval. I'm going to bail out of this screen share now because I have no more slides and you can see my face better. But again, I think things have already changed. So my colleague, the priest, called the chaplain at the Richwood Detention Center just a few days ago and got a very, very warm response. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so grateful that you called me. Yes, we want to work with you, etc. That was not the response earlier on. The response earlier on was very, very different. I had a friend who went there, a fellow faculty member at the university who went to visit a prisoner, and she had that person's name, a detainee. She had his name, but they asked her at the door, well, how did you know about him? Well, she says, I'm a part of this group that's it. And they, oh, well, you represent an organization. You have to go get your organization approved before you can come in. And they would not let her in to visit this person. So we learned to not say anything about a group when we went, because that would get you blocked. And so again, already things are changing. And I really think that's because the political climate is shifting as we speak, and that things will be better. But that is our hope and plan, is to provide across Louisiana. We're sort of encouraging now different members of the group to contact the detention center closest to them and see what they can do and so forth. So that's our plan. And I'm grateful that our bishop is willing to invest this energy in reaching out to these people. I think that's about all I'm going to say until you ask me some questions.
Linda Shelton has a question.
Yes, I'm in Houston with the Diocese of Texas, and we've done just a little bit of work, mostly with visits to the border. But the Diocese of West Texas has a very active ministry now, and it parallels much of what Betty is talking about. Began this last summer, and the bishop there has been very supportive. They have a person now on staff whose name is Flor Salvador. I put it in the chat, but the Diocese of West Texas would welcome both financial donations, but as of, I think it was September, they also could use volunteers who could help just with making phone calls with some of the things you were talking about, Betty, like, hotel reservations or bus reservations, that sort of thing, calling relatives. It may have changed a little bit, but also Episcopal Migration Ministries, which is the refugee resettlement arm of the Episcopal Church, has expanded and now has an active asylum seeking ministry as well. And so if you go to episcopalmigrationministries.org, you can see that they are networking and are presenting webinars on this and explaining, much like the Louisiana, the prison, basically its financial need, that the, the prisons with paid contract is the basis of a lot of this. And we have that in Texas, being with Highway 10 going through, much like with the, human trafficking issue is huge on Highway 10 across the country. And so these ministries are springing up, but Episcopal Migration Ministries is really doing a lot. They had a prayer vigil last night. And so I would urge you to join that and network with them, and just, it's a good for learning, but also how you can actually help on the ground no matter where we are across the country.
Episcopal Migration Ministries is a wonderful thing. I was on the vigil last night as well, Linda. It was very powerful and very moving. Wonderful to be there. But yes, go there. You will find some more ways that you can help.
Right. And I see the chat from Roderick. Yes, Episcopal Migration Ministries is one of the 9 United States partners that are national voluntary organizations that the U.S. government works with. So Roman Catholics and Lutheran immigration and refugee is really a great resource. And also Episcopal Public Policy Network, the advocacy arm of the church, is a huge way for all of us to stay informed and to be advocates for changes in social policy. So.
Absolutely.
Are there others that would like to ask Betty or speak to this issue, just even in an informative way? What you know, what you are involved in, whatever. It'll certainly be very important to keep our eyes on the prize, if you will, as this new administration takes office and comes in, to see what kind of changes are made, and what or how those changes have been impacted and what is already going on. That will be very interesting. And Betty, my gosh, wonderful stories and wonderful ways to get involved. And it sounds to me like, lady, you didn't quite know what was going to happen, but somebody saw or got a hold of you and away you went. So we deacons, I think, understand that sometimes we're just in the right place at the right time and get grabbed up. But this is a big humanitarian issue for sure. And
Allies for Immigrants, our diocesan ministry, also is on our diocesan homepage, or on our diocesan website. So I'm going to I'm going to put this in the chat as well, to everyone. Allies for Immigrants, a ministry of the, actually we don't, we call ourselves a ministry of the Episcopal Church in Western Louisiana.
okay. So there may be an
If you wanna find
opportunity.
us, yeah, you can go there. You can go to our website and find that.
Great. There's an opportunity here perhaps for a number of us to get dioceses to click into this
Yes.
also.
Yes.
And that's a wonderful thing to share. This isn't just a local thing, Monroe, Louisiana, or whatever, but to get a diocese. And also, Linda, it sounds like West Texas is kind of taking a hold there too, and they're doing things. So is there anybody else here who has a diocese that is active in immigration ministries?
Hi, I'd like to speak. I'm Nancy Meister. I'm from the Diocese of Arizona, and we have been involved on many levels. I'm in Tucson at Grace St. Paul's Episcopal Church. I missed the very first part of the session, I'm sorry. But there's several very active things going on. First, we're a sanctuary church, one of 5 in Tucson. I have primarily been involved with Casa Alitas, which has been receiving asylum seekers. And of course, at one point we had like 400 people coming across, and we're now, there's a whole planning meeting tomorrow to gear up to what's going to happen. We've already seen an increase of some people coming from the border, and then we also have people that are released from the detention centers in Eloy, which, by the way, I think have had the highest COVID incidence in the country of any. And we were advocating strongly to get those prisoners released from detention.
Mm-hmm.
And they have released a lot of them. So there's a very active visitation program that's been going on for a long time called Casa Mariposa. And I was a long time ago involved in that, but and there's the Florence project, which is the legal arm of that, the Florence Immigration Project. So there's a lot going on. Also, our bishop has been involved, we may have heard of Deacon Roger Babnew, in a shelter in Nogales, Mexico, that is housing a number of people that are waiting, asylum seekers. So I'd say there's quite a bit going on in the Diocese of Arizona. So that's why I wanted to come and hear about Louisiana. I'm just amazed that I just was in shock when I saw the number of detention centers that you have. And I wanted to ask, are they very small? Like, are these jails small? So they're not like the kinds of places that we have in Arizona that are private and are huge.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Some of them are pretty small, Nancy, but I have not, I don't really know. I do know that right now it's even really hard. Our immigration attorney has been having trouble even finding out numbers anymore, how many. They move them around a lot. And then we also have a deportation center. One of our places here in Louisiana is where they bring people to deport them. And so, for example, Cameroonians, a bunch of Cameroonians were deported out of Louisiana, and they'll bring them into so even finding out the number of detainees in our centers at this point in time has been really, really hard because everything is in so much flux. But I can say that it's thousands, that it's thousands.
Do they just house them with the regular criminals that are breaking the law?
Very possibly, very probably, because Richwood sure doesn't have 2 jails. It's got 1 detention center, and so everybody's there together. So yeah, and we have a very high incarcerated population as well. So yeah, but some of them are small, and some of them, the one at Richwood will hold a couple thousand people, but others of the one
That's not very small.
Well, I know that probably does not, if you're from Houston or Tucson, that probably doesn't sound big, but here it's kind of big.
So they're coming from other border places like.
Oh, yes. ICE is bringing them. They're not coming to Louisiana. ICE is bringing them to Louisiana.
Right.
We don't get hardly any immigrants walking into, ICE brings them to Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
One of the good things about their being taken to other states is that they have a much higher chance of having a positive approval for asylum from other states than within Texas. And so that's actually good news for the seekers. But, one of the other things I was saying, because this can be political, and I know, we walk the razor's edge on that sometimes, and how we build support, and also how we persuade our bishops to get involved. That's one way with the Episcopal Public Policy Network, showing that this is a ministry of the national church, and that Bishop Curry is very much an advocate for this, and that the Episcopal Migration Ministries is an established ministry. They celebrated their 35th anniversary a couple of years ago. So having that backing and showing the network of dioceses across the country. I know that the deacon in Atlanta, Georgia, Leanne, I'm trying to think, it's Caldwell Cuthbert. I think she's written something for the AED newsletter. Anyway, she is a very strong advocate and visits in the detention centers, and I know she'd be happy to talk with any of you. I went to a workshop a couple of years ago, and we went to a detention center just there in Atlanta. And it was right there in the middle of the city. I had actually passed and sat in front of it on the metro line coming from the airport to downtown Atlanta for this conference, and was shocked. I had no idea that it was a detention center until the next night. She took us there for a prayer vigil. And during the General Convention 2 years ago in Austin, it was a planned event that we had a prayer vigil outside I think it was the Hutto Center, which was women and children.
Right.
And it was so amazing in that they held up white pieces of paper or handkerchiefs in the windows. And of course we were across an athletic field and more from them, but we could wave white handkerchiefs back at them. Just to show that that connection, that we saw each other, which really touched me, because the day before, one of the bishop or speaker from one of the African countries had talked about the power of just seeing each other is how we connect. as humanitarian efforts. And so to see that lived out the next day was very powerful. And Bishop Curry, was at that as well. So sometimes just showing that, we're not alone in this, I think really helps us to step out and to be the voice for these people who really have very few.
Yeah.
I'm afraid we're getting to the end of our hour, and this is obviously a conversation that could use a whole lot more time. I would like to invite anybody who has resources or wants to stay connected in networking to please put information in the chat, and we'll make sure to share it with new folks so that everyone has a way of staying in touch if you'd like to continue the conversation. There certainly is a great deal of good work going on. And from the preliminary questions that we got, one of the things that seemed to be one of the greatest obstacles was folks not knowing where to begin. So you've given us some tremendous resources. Betty, thank you in particular for leading this conversation and for bringing so much rich conversation into what we're doing. There's certainly a lot more that can be done, but we've got a great start with leadership like yours. I want to make sure. Oh, go ahead.
Resource. Yeah, I just put another resource. There's an organization headquartered in New Orleans called Voces Unidas, Louisiana Immigration Rights Coalition. They are very activist. They are very knowledgeable. They do training if you want to be a visitor or a pen pal, etc. So that's another place you can contact to get more information.
Fantastic. As I mentioned at the beginning of the program, we have been recording this. It's currently being hosted by the Episcopal Province of New England. Province1.org has a diaconal ministry section, and you'll see a button called Video Archive. That's where you can find programs going back at least 5 or 6 years. So it's a rich resource. We'll be moving it to be on another site as well, and we'll keep you posted on where it is. But for now, look for the recording of this and pass it on to your friends that you know are interested in this topic. In closing, I'd like to offer what I offer for all of our Deacons Talking closings. It's the benediction from the Franciscans. So if you could take a moment, take a deep breath, allow space, and listen to these words. May God bless us with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that we may live deep within our hearts. May God bless us with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that we may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless us with tears to shed for those who suffer pain, rejection, hunger, and war, so that we may reach out our hand to comfort them and turn their pain into joy. And may God bless us with enough foolishness to believe that we can make a difference in this world, to do what others claim cannot be done, and to bring justice and kindness to all our children and to the poor. We ask this all in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone, and good evening.
Thank you.
Take care. God bless.
Look forward to seeing you January 11th. Have a great evening. Merry
God bless
Christmas.
you.
Happy
Merry
holidays.
Christmas,
Merry
everybody.
Christmas, Happy New Year.
Christmas. Thank you, Betty.
You're
Thanks
welcome.
for all that you all do.
Merry Christmas to Rodney from Frank in Diocese of Toronto.